Making puzzle joints on CNCs, it seems intimidating, but it's really not that difficult. There's just a few things to keep in mind. One is the side of the cut that you're cutting on, the side of the line that you're cutting on, and then just a little bit of an offset to kind of make up for the fudge factor. But it's not a difficult process, even though it looks sort of involved. So what we've got opened here on our screen, this is Vectric Cut 2D Pro. This is version 12. It came out a few months ago. I'm still getting used to some of the new icons and the way they've cleaned it up a little bit. But this would work fine on the previous versions. It does not need to be Pro, and it's pretty simple. So we'll go through this pretty much step by step and show a very basic way of doing this. The first thing we've got here are some shapes. We can zoom in a little bit on these, and these were found on a ShopBot forum actually. So we've got our gentle curves here, and what I'll do is I'll bring up the screen where I found that link so those can be downloaded. Once you get these basic shapes, then you can do all kinds of really fun things with them as far as stretching them, enlarging them, putting them in different forms and different connections, so you've got lots and lots of loops if you'd like. You can also make your own organic shapes and tie it together. There are several ways to do that. I won't get into that too much here, or if at all here, because there's lots of ways to do that. And this is pretty much just an overview. Folks that are used to some of the sketching tools here can figure out pretty fast how to make the shapes that they'd like, either organic shapes or repeating shapes that are identical. But for this example, we're going to use these from the ShopBot link. The shape we've got here, this is a scrap of wood that I've got on the CNC right now. This is not exactly the shape of the piece that I have on there. And what we're going to do for this kind of demonstration is use a thin sheet of, it's almost like Luan. I think it's called Revolutionary Ply. I picked up a bunch of it from Lowe's for a different project, and that will show the way this works without cutting into too much big stuff. But the first thing we need to do is get one of these shapes kind of separated onto its own. Let's clear these out of our screen because we don't need these. And we'll zoom in here a little bit, and we can kind of leave this the same shape that it is. What we need to do is we need to make two sections with this design. So we're going to put a box around this, and then we're simply going to use our scissors and snip away the stuff that we don't need from the alternating sides. So to first get a box around this, let's box this guy in. Then we're going to elongate this a little bit. So we get our lines kind of out of our box. Stretch that there. And again, we're going to keep this real simple just for this little demonstration. We can make this box just a little bit bigger. And what we're going to have is we're going to have sort of a positive and a negative, or a top and a bottom. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple at this point. We come over to our scissors. We're going to do some cutting here. Snip off the sides that we don't need. But before we keep cutting, what we've got to do is make a copy of this, because we're going to use one copy for the top, one copy for the bottom. So grab the whole thing. I'm using a trackball here, but we're just going to copy this, make a duplicate, and then move it off on its own. So we've got our two pieces here. And again, we're going to use one for the top and one for the bottom. So what we want to do here is just go get our scissors tool, zoom in a little bit here, go get our scissors, and for this one, let's keep the top part. So we've got our top part here, and for this one, let's keep the bottom part. So we've got our top and our bottom, and you can kind of see how these two fit together. But we can't just cut these out on the CNC as they are because they won't fit. So the next thing we need to do is get into our toolpaths. We have our toolpath options open right now. For those that have used Vectric, this is very familiar. For those that use other CNC tooling programs, it's pretty similar as far as the operations that we have here. Each program, of course, has its own little extras and bells and whistles. Here we've got some milling operations, some drilling operations, and then these are the primary ones that most folks use. You're either doing profile cuts or you're doing pocket cuts. And for these, we're doing profile cuts. So we're going to start with the top one here. So let's highlight this. Come over to our profile toolpath option. Click that. The sheet that we're using is pretty thin. Again, it's kind of like Luan, so it's pretty thin stuff. And I want to make sure we do go through it here. I'm using 1/8 of an inch end mill, and I'm doing shallow cuts to kind of keep it clean. We could go much quicker, but we're keeping this kind of light just to make sure that our cuts are neat. We're doing outside right. We're going to add some tabs here. Just throw a few on here. I don't like to put tabs on the curves because it's kind of hard to clean those up. Hit close. Come down here. And we could give this a name, but we're going to save all this in the same kind of file here. Before we finish with this screen, we do want to give this piece a slight offset allowance. So for the machine I'm using now, we're going to go 0.02. Somewhere between 0.01, 0.02 is about where it falls. It's a pretty tight machine, but we do want to give a little bit of wiggle room right there. So we go to calculate. Yep, we're going to cut through. I'm aware of that because I want to make sure we go through. And then we've got our piece here. As far as the alignment on our board here, not something I'm worried about. This piece in here is pretty much just a spacer for right now because the board that we've got on the CNC is much larger. So that's our top piece. We'll close this. Let's go back to our 2D view. And here we can see the path for the end mill for the router as it's going around. Now we need to cut this one out. So we're going to highlight that. Go back up to our toolpath. All this stuff stays the same. Still doing outside right. We're not doing an allowance for this one. We do need to put a couple tabs on here. Or a few tabs. I'll do 3 tabs. Close. Come down to the bottom, and again we could give this a name, but we're not going to right now. This is just going to go into the same file. Calculate. Yep, we're going to cut through. And then here's both of our pieces. And you can see the tabs here. Because this wood is very thin, I like tall tabs. Make sure we've got enough space to hold that down. Close this. We'll go over to our toolpath. We're going to save this. And we'll save it to our USB drive. Just back in the shop, we've got our file on our USB drive. Let's get this plugged in and start lining up our cut. Got our drive in, we've got Mach 3 opened up. Let's bring this file in. And we'll get this lined up. In the meantime, let's get our actual CNC over to where we want it to be. Touch plates are nice. I may get around to building another one for this, but for the time being, a sheet of paper works just as well. And our pieces are cut, but before we put these together, let's take a minute and talk about today's sponsors. We've got our two pieces and our tabs. Got 1, 2, 3 tabs on each, and these are nice and tall. Let me put the camera down, we'll tap these out and then see how closely they fit together. We've just tapped these out. That's our bottom and our top. And this is before any sanding or cleaning up. And it fits beautifully. We could even go down, we could drop a thou on there. That is a tight, tight, beautiful fit. Give this a quick sand and we'll take another look. I wanted to get a little bit closer and see if we could true this up a little bit more. And for this machine, 0.05 for the offset is gorgeous. This just fits in there absolutely wonderfully. These are extremely tight for those right there. Every machine's a little bit different. I've done this on other CNCs, and this is the first time working with this one. But that's basically the process. And this can be expanded or worked into all kinds of different builds, all kinds of different projects. Very cool stuff. Thanks very much for taking a look.